Today we're going to be talking about air leakage testing for home inspectors. What this webinar is really about is about home inspectors, kind of helping home inspectors understand what energy auditors do, maybe helping energy auditors understand what home inspectors do, so that you can kind of understand what happens when, from a home inspector's perspective, when you hand that report over to them once you've made some recommendations. We also want to help you find some opportunities for sort of diversifying your business, your revenue streams. We want to kind of look to the future, so we're going to be talking about some of the cool gadgets. We're going to be talking about some of the trends in the industry. But again, before I go too far, I definitely want to introduce the real stars of the show. Unmute yourself, gentlemen. First, I want to say hello and thank you to Ben Gromyko. Ben, you're the director of the InterNACHI School.
Yeah, I'm the director of education. I'm responsible for all the education that we do.
Awesome. That's great. And then Joe Medosh, who is an independent trainer. Joe, what does that mean?
That I don't really work for anybody except my own company. So I have energy environmental consulting, and I used to be a home inspector in Arizona, and I did that for many years, and have now moved on to more of energy and consulting. So I think many home inspectors were builders or doing a variety of stuff, and that wanted to get out of some of the physical things that go along with being a home inspector. And then I still felt there were too many physical things happening with crawl spaces and attics that I decided to just be a consultant and even do less physical activity in the house. So life is a lot better as a consultant. So, but you need to be able to do all of those things in order to get to where we're all headed.
Absolutely. And Ben, what brought you here? Can I ask?
Yeah, so I grew up literally building homes, and built a few homes from, picking a half acre of land, falling the trees, digging with a backhoe, to putting the fixtures in the bathrooms, everything in between. And then these nasty inspectors kept coming around and picking on my work. And I realized there might be a better way to earn a living. And so I started doing home inspections. And then a few years ago, I stopped doing inspections, and now we're really concentrated on being a really big organization, giving a lot of training and certifications and doing live classes like this one.
Awesome. Thanks. So okay, you sound like Mike Holmes from Canada, like Homes on Homes, and then you switched over to homes inspection.
Yeah, I did about 13 years of home inspections in southeastern PA, and it was probably the best job I've ever had. Maybe even better some days than what I'm doing right now, because every day you get to help folks make really good, smart decisions at a really critical moment in their life. And it was just a lot of fun. So I love doing home inspections, love doing it, and now I really enjoy doing what I'm doing.
Great. So, and I'm Jay West. I'm an education consultant, and that's not really much different from Joe, who's an independent trainer. Except for I live in Chicago, but I'm basically just a nice guy from out of town, just trying to have a good time. So let's get into the meat of the presentation. Ben, again, thank you so much for being here with us. It is a pleasure and an honor, and it's going to be fun. So we had a nice conversation yesterday. For those of you who are on the webinar already, you've probably learned how to use your control panel. Pretty simple. If you wanted to get it out of your face, just hit that red button. Additionally, some of the general information about that control panel, very important to understand that this right here is where ask questions, provide feedback, whatever you want to do, use your question panel. I can see many of you are already doing that. That's great. That's very, very important for you. While you're here, this is the power of a webinar, is that it's actually interactive. So please interact. Help us customize this for you. You don't have to worry about taking notes. this webinar, as with all of our webinars, you may have found it here on our website, retrotec.com, but additionally, you will find many videos of past webinars. You'll definitely find any information that you need, anything that we talk about. You're going to find guides, manuals, all that stuff on retrotec.com. Literally, there's a search engine in there. It's really its own sort of wiki of information. So you can find just about anything we're talking about. So you don't have to worry about making sure that you write down everything. But if that's not good enough, if you really want to sort of see the video, if you want to reference this, what we talked about here today, all of our webinars end up on our YouTube site. There's lots of other information, lots of other videos that aren't just webinars, but that particular information is in there. All right, so hoping that this thing stops auto-forwarding after this. Here's what we're going to talk about today. So basically, these are our session objectives. There's not going to be, at the end of the day, there is not going to be a test. So these aren't learning objectives. They won't be demonstrable. But these are the things that we want to talk about. These are things that that Ben and Joe and I talked about and thought that these were important things. And hopefully, via the question panel, you can tell us if you think that they're important, what you want to hear more about, and give us feedback about what you think about it. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is what sort of effect will the IECC adoption have on the housing industry. IECC is the International Energy Code, and that is we're going to talk about how that affects homeowners and how that affects inspectors and the industry in general. And you might be surprised to find out some of the ways that it affects you. So what type of tests will you need to know? So we will be talking about some of the tests and that you can run, some tests that are invasive and some that are non-invasive. What obstacles do home inspectors run into when they start testing? Definitely going to hear a lot from Ben, and want to hear a lot from you guys. Hear about your obstacles out there. Maybe we can get a discussion going about that. And then we're going to go on to what is meant by a house as a system. So we're really going to kind of get into some nitty-gritty with the building science and sort of what taking a bigger picture, what problems are common in houses that are not built as a system, and how do you find these problems and how do you avoid them. Anything else? Anybody want to use your question panel to tell me if there's something missing from there that you're just dying to find out about? Go ahead and send that in. The way that Joe and I operate this is usually when one of us is talking, the other one is answering questions in the background. If it's a question that requires a whole lot of explanation, or if it's really, really pertinent, we'll answer it right away. And if it's not pertinent, or if we don't have time to cover it, or if we're going to cover it later, we'll usually do it at the end of the presentation. But we never close a webinar with questions unanswered. So stick around if you have more questions at the end. Everybody okay with that? All right. So let's get going. And nice. So let's talk right off the bat. Let's talk about the difference, the two worlds here, the world of the non-invasive inspection, sort of the visual inspection, and then the diagnostic inspection. Now, there's definitely lots of different terminology for those two types of inspections, or those two types of ways of approaching a house. However, for this presentation, this webinar that we're going to be doing here, this is kind of the terminology we're going to use. So Joe made this slide, and I think that it's really, I think it's pretty cool, because what Joe said is that the difference between a non-invasive diagnostic, non-invasive inspection and a diagnostic inspection is sort of the difference between by saying, well, which one of these guys has a broken arm? Well, visually, both of their arms look completely the same, but if you used a diagnostic device like an X-ray machine, then you would see that this guy has a broken arm. So I think, Joe, that probably, I think that that's kind of the essence of that slide, and that idea of what we're going to be talking about. But more specifically, Joe, do you want to kind of take them through this table?
Yeah, sure. So I understand as well as Ben does. Jay kind of got more of the thing is that what home inspectors do versus energy auditors, and a lot of things that home inspectors we did is it's very visual based. You aren't there to tear the home apart or pull things apart or turn things on or off in certain ways that shouldn't really been tampered with. So it is like, this is the home right now as I'm looking at it. What can I conclude based upon a primarily a visual type of inspection? So there are several things that you can actually conclude. In fact, I'm sure many of the people that are out there are doing many of these things. So my goal is to try to help you with some knowledge that will not kill your deals. That's always been the challenge when I would, as a home inspector, I would go to seminars or do something and be like, oh no, how do I tell homeowners about this and not kill the deal? And many of you may work with realtors who you drive them nuts because you're very informative with your clients. And I always felt that I'd rather, kill the deal, or I may lose a realtor every now and then because I told them what I felt they should need to know. So in the center is some concepts that we're kind of going to talk about today. And on the left is things you can actually try to make conclusions about in terms of the visual aspect. And on the right is the diagnostic tools that are much more advanced or give you more business opportunity as a kind of the secondary option there. So duct leakage, many of you are turning on the air handler before you go to the crawl space or the attic. You can actually find or feel air blowing around. The way one place to focus is always at the air handler itself. Dominant duct leakage is actually, do you have more return or supply leakage? And you kind of can do that based upon the things you may find or feel as the system is running. But with just a simple gauge, you can actually determine that in a house by actually sealing up the house and having a gauge determine whether the house kind of goes negative or positive with the air handler on. There's a lot of heat transfer issues that come into houses where attics and knee walls that don't have insulation or the insulation is missing. So a lot of that, again, is a very simple visual of missing locations or poorly installed locations versus actually going the whole gamut with an IR camera, or even better is an IR camera with a blower door can actually show you missing insulation and air infiltration. The other one is envelope leakage. Again, something that, again, on the right is normally done with a blower door test, but you can evaluate top plates and penetrations or critical junctions. And the priority is really the attic. Even though the crawl space has these issues, most of our dominant leakage is moving up towards the attic or heat transfers. So a lot of times you can go to an attic and find out that they did have air sealing, or those are like, kudos, or, your home did appear to be air sealed, or things that your homeowner wants to know about and they're easily disclosed. So the last one is the ventilation system, where, when you can confirm that the dampers are working outside because you turned on the range and the bathroom fans. I always turn them on before I go into the attic or crawl space, depending on which way they're flowing, and make sure that I can hear them or see that they are going outside. I go outside to make sure the dampers opened up. And you can actually use a simple tissue test with the exhaust fans in the bathroom. If you kind of cover the whole thing to make sure it's staying up, it's usually considered a 50 CFM. The other part is you can actually use a gauge and or a powered flow hood. You can use a gauge with a cardboard box to actually give an accurate assessment of a ventilation system. So these are the fine lines between all things you can do in a visual, what else you can do with some diagnostic stuff, or if people have problems, why the diagnostic tools allow you to come back to evaluate stuff for homeowners.
Thanks, Joe. So, Ben, I'd like to ask you, how much of this stuff is in the home energy score? How does the home energy score fit into the visual or the world between the visual or diagnostic, and how how is that going to affect home inspectors?
Yeah, so there, you think of the standards of practice when you're doing a home inspection. Basically, it's a guide to take you through a home. And what home inspectors have been doing is they've been collecting information about energy for years, since the very beginning. Just not really commenting upon it, not gathering the information and communicating that information that they've gathered that's related to home energy. So the score is a label, as a way for a home inspector to communicate what could be kind of complex issues about home energy consumption, energy deficiencies, using the same data that the home inspector has gathered during a typical home inspection according to the standards of practice. So it's kind of like a really great, easy, no-brainer tool to use if you're a home inspector, because you don't have to start from scratch and try to figure out what to say about the lack of energy, lack of insulation in the attic, or some unsealed ductwork that doesn't have any mastic or insulation that you see in the unfinished crawl space. This will do it for you. So the home energy scores is a way for a home inspector to easily, with a click of a button almost, talk to their clients about home energy.
And in order to do that, does a home inspector need to have some sort of certification?
Yeah.
By the way, guys, it's not a loaded question. It sounds like a Ben. I don't. It sounds like Ben already told me to ask that, but I actually am serious about that question.
Yeah. And so is InterNACHI. We have over 30 different types of certifications, not just certified home inspectors, but all different kinds of services that home inspectors could offer. We like to train and certify them, make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they are setting their clients' expectations for. So the Home Energy Score is a program, and the DOE worked on it for a couple of years. I was involved, a bunch of other people were involved in organizations in developing pilots and things like that. Now it's all done and ready to go. And the Home Energy Score is a national program that you could participate through InterNACHI. We're a national partner of the Home Energy Score program. And you have to be trained and certified. Not only trained to perform that visual inspection going through the home, but trained also on the issues of home energy. What should the client really be concerned about when you are making recommendations from the observations that you give? A homeowner tends to think about bling, granite countertops, and really cool stuff to buy for the home. But we know better, right? We've been in the bad places of the home, and we understand what's actually important. And what's actually important is sometimes difficult to communicate to the client in an easy way. And the Home Energy Score is that tool that a home inspector can use to easily communicate complex issues that they find during an inspection related to home energy.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, Ben, can you talk a little bit louder? We've got a request for apparently you are so interesting. You just can't be loud enough for him. So I'll send that out. Yeah. So this is a nice place to segue into where we're talking about certification, we're talking about training, we're talking about sort of these resources. There are several other. There's 30. That's pretty impressive. InterNACHI has 30, certifications. That's a lot. And then home energy is that home energy score. Is that its own certification, or is that wrapped? Or is that other certifications that are wrapped together?
To be a qualified home energy score assessor, you have to take the required training. You have to complete the required training, which is really cool. It's actually a 3D house that you walk through, like an avatar kind of thing. And you also are trained on the Home Energy Score software itself. And everything's free, by the way. Good job at the DOE. The training is free. The score software is free. But you have to be trained and certified to be a qualified Home Energy Score assessor.
Interesting. So the reason why I ask, not only, but additionally, it's a nice segue into to our national manufacturer certification that we offer for duct tester, for the blower door, and depending on here you'll see this is an example of a certification. This is a residential duct tester operation with a DM32, which is one of our gauges. Our certifications are very brief, very specific. They're all online, similar to the one that you discussed, but they are very, very specific to the equipment. they are free with the equipment that you buy, and then for additional certifications, or for, you can actually just pay a nominal fee. And it's always with the exception of well, in the energy field, I should say, we do also do enclosure integrity, fire, stuff like that. But within the energy sector, those certifications are always less than, say, $100. So it's a nominal fee, but we will really like to push this, or to talk about this when we're talking about, you name it, BPI, ResNet, any of those certifications that say, yes, you need to know how to run a blower door or run a duct tester, and even we'll talk about how to do that, but they don't specifically say that the one that you have, you know how to run. So this one, that's basically what that does. So that's a little bit about certifications, everybody. Anybody have any questions about that? And looks like, Ben, it sounds like everybody's pretty happy about your voice quality. Well, let's talk, and let's move into, I don't see any questions about that, any questions about the certifications of the home energy score. Let's talk a little bit about the IECC. And let's talk a little bit about codes. So here what you're seeing, yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. What you're seeing here is a comparison between that June of 2013 and June 2015. Those are both maps, you'll see, and I can kind of go back if you like. But this is the original map. This is what the code, this is what the overview of what the code was like, state by state, of who was actually following the IEC code, and what that IEC code they were following. But as you see, over the last 2 years, it has changed significantly. And Joe, if I can ask you, has that been sort of a slow change, or do you feel like that has been, or what's been the rate of that change, and how frequently have these states been moving over, and what's going on right now as far as a trend?
Yeah, just in the last few months, many states have adopted some sort of, and the one thing is to actually have a energy conservation code adoption, but many of them avoid testing. And testing for us is always the key part about doing that. That, for home inspector, everything's based on a visual assessment, but to confirm that your envelope is not leaking very much visually for a brand new house that's going to be around for 150 years is always kind of the poor way of determining whether or not it's actually well put together. So we're always for diagnostic testing, especially for home early in its lifespan. So Georgia was actually the first to actually come on board with those, but Florida will be having blower door testing. You can see many of the states here, South Carolina, North Carolina, are all adding blower doors. A lot of them have duct testing requirements. Within 2017, all states are technically going to be required to do duct testing as part of their energy conservation code compliance. Many of them will be needing to adopt some type of statewide code. Some will still say the heck with you and may or may not do it. So I understand as well that that the energy, whatever the code is, doesn't matter for the house you're inspecting, but we also still use what's considered to be best practices or the standard when we try to compare how well a home is doing. So a home that's 20 years old wasn't required to have GFCIs in certain locations that it does now. So we make comments about certain things based upon what is the safety standard or the common standard today. If you go to a bathroom that does not have ventilation, again, 25 years ago, wasn't required really to have that. May have had a window, may not operate, but now those are all things we do comment on, and they're really based upon our codes as a way of comparing, older homes to what would be an existing scenario.
So that leads us to a good question. Ben, yesterday you and I talked about this a little bit about why is the code for new building important or applicable to building inspectors who are inspecting built buildings?
Right. So we're eventually going to get to them, and our world is really in the existing housing market, existing homes. Nowadays, most of them were built many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, to that standard. That standard is now considered very inefficient. Most of our homes bleed energy, which means they also bleed money. So when we go into an existing home and we visually see some inefficiencies, some very thin, let's say, insulation in the northern climate on the attic floor, we can make a recommendation. But we have to know, just like Joe said, we have to know the standards. We're not code inspectors. We don't even reference directly code or put it in the report. But we have to know that, there's, last month you could be thinking about R30, but really you should be thinking about R49 in some climates. You have thicker insulation paired with air sealing techniques. That's what we should be looking for. And if we don't see that kind of stuff, then it's not a best practice, and we could recommend, make intelligent recommendations about what to do based upon our observations.
One of the things that is common for many of your home inspection reports is things that are recommendations, and in theory they are all recommendations, but some have a more priority. So I actually tried to make the energy comments something that would be a recommended improvement versus the fact that you have no GFCIs in your kitchen as a higher recommendation. So I think that there's a way to inform your client about things they can do to improve their home without really making it something that feels as though the home was not still a good home.
Right.
You're absolutely right. I mean, right. The real goal of a home inspection is to make sure that there aren't any immediate, imminent danger to someone that's going to move into the home. Second level, I guess you could say, is the recommendations that would maybe bring it up to code or make it perform better. The house can perform better, so yeah. Just one thing about code also is ICC is a great resource. I was just going through a recent catalog I got in the mail. There's a lot of field guides that are available, and I think there's one called the Energy Inspector Guide or something like that. So there's a lot of resources, not just internet, but a lot of resources out there for home inspectors to refer to. That's really all about code, but it really helps the home inspector perform their inspection service better because they know what they're talking about.
Right, and with that said, the whole point of this slide and this part of the discussion is to also talk about trends. The fact that that this building code now has sprung up, is actually gaining a great deal of momentum over the last 2 years, but especially in the last probably 6 months. So, it's important for guys out there in the field, for guys who are doing home inspections to understand, to be able to see the future and to, kind of by monitoring the trends out there, and that's one of them. But
reflecting in the trends, Internachi is now developing a ton of energy courses. I mean, we're even doing live webinars. We're talking about being a home energy score, and that's just a dedicated webinar. We're talking about how to use an infrared camera. And I see the next slide, House as a System. We have a course on that. So that is the trend, to be technically good in really both worlds, the home inspection world, but the home inspector who can also comment intelligently on home energy issues.
Absolutely. So that's and we are on a webinar. In fact, this is a live webinar. Unless you're listening to us on YouTube right now, it's like a space warp or something, time warp. But yeah, I definitely. And if you want to be able to intelligently discuss, if you really want to understand what's going on, if you want to make comments, then you need to understand the house as a system. And one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting about the offerings, the Internachi offerings, is the fact that you guys do talk about house as a system. And I think in order to understand the house as a system, what you really need to understand, more than that, it's just a big piece of cheese, is pressure in the building. And that's really what we're talking about, isn't it? I mean, even when we're talking about, so if we're talking about how the walls operate, when we talk about how the forced air system changes things in the house, and really most of how that sort of attic is connected to that crawl space really is via air or via, and the communication is usually through pressure. So that's kind of when we talk about that's the main thing that we really need to understand when we talk about house as a system. So, and house as a system is, probably could be a master's degree, but just quickly, just a quick overview of it. Really, what we're talking about is, in order for a house to operate well as a system, in order for you to have that sort of means of control, the building and thermal envelope need to separate the conditioned space from the unconditioned space, and that's the indoors from the outdoors. And so the two main elements are going to be air barriers and insulation. And those need to be continuous and contiguous. That means they have to cover everything and touch everything in order for that to work. And that's something that that I talked to Ben about a little bit yesterday. Was just basically InterNACHI working with Owens Corning to get people another way. That's another certification, right, Ben, for sort of these fundamentals of air barrier and insulation inspection. Is that, can you speak to that a little bit more?
That's right. So we do have several courses that are directly related to the house as a system. And it's a great idea to take them because even if you're not going to, let's say you're not going to do the home energy score or do any energy reports at all, you really should approach your home inspection, your typical home inspection, with this idea that a house is a system of interdependent parts. You screw up one part and it messes up all the others. And it's true, the attic is connected to the unfinished basement, and these courses can help you. One of the things that I love to do on a training class is to bring up a slide with fiberglass bat insulation, blanket insulation. You pull up the blanket insulation, you can see these black lines. It looks like mold or something, right? You pull it up and you see the underside, and where's all this black stuff? Well, one of the things that home inspectors should understand is that fiberglass is really called filter glass. It doesn't stop air leakage, it just filters it. And that black stuff that you see on the bottom side of the insulation is actually dirt being carried through the walls, the interior non-load bearing walls, but potentially, and it just brings up all that dirt from a stack effect. So this type of understanding, when you're up in the attic, it's, to be a great master inspector, you have to know more than what you're just doing. The standards of practice is just a minimum. So to really be the best and to, to serve your client better, these little tricks of the trade, understanding what you're actually seeing. You've been seeing these things for years, but it's actually all about building science and house as a system kind of stuff.
These are, go back to that slide if you could, Jay. These are actually my slides from when I was a home inspector, and there was a change in my business model when I had to, I had, then learned to discover that, the upper right corner, that attic is almost uninsulated. And this crawl space in the bottom left is almost uninsulated. That when the insulation does not touch the air barrier, which is typically the drywall or the flooring or the subfloor, that it is almost ineffective. That when there's an air gap that's able to exist between the insulation and the air barrier, that when air is allowed to move through there through convection issues or just not able to retain the heat where it was belonged, that it almost becomes ineffective. So when I knew this and tried to educate my clients about that, it was a tough thing to write up and a tough sell, because I felt that it was a significant issue and that their heating or cooling bills were going to actually be affected. But I bit the bullet and somehow survived. So you can actually educate your clients about, changing out some insulation, or the only bats that really belong in an attic are the ones that have wings, and you should get rid of them. So whatever kind of bats you got, they should always be out of your attic. Blown in will always do a great job of covering, and it's really not that much of an upgrade for expense.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, I'm writing that one down.
Yeah. Or you could just say, I like to say, if there's in your belfry, that's where the bats go. But if there is a bat, it needs to be installed correctly. And the point is that the problem with that is, again, that there are three main different types of heat transfer that we're dealing with, because we don't deal with plasma in most homes. We are dealing with conduction, which is heat loss between two solid objects that are touching. radiation, which is heat moving just through the electromagnetic spectrum, blah blah blah. But then convection, and convection is when a heat moves via a fluid or an air, water, whatever. So the issue here is that it's a big deal. So if you're not stopping that air, that warm air moving either into when it's hot outside, moving into the home, or when it's hot or it's cold outside, the heat moving out of the home, then we're getting these massive losses. And you see where these losses are from. So number one, number two, so the second most area of heat loss is less than half of number one, and number one is floors, walls, and ceilings. Number two is ductwork. So yes, we can insulate, we can inspect that insulation visually, and we can do it diagnostically. First, let's talk a little bit about how to do that visually. Before though, and Joe, I'm gonna hand off the baton to you. But before that, we do have a good question here. And the question is, do you have to be a member of InterNACHI to get certification through your courses, Ben?
Yes. There's a monthly fee and a yearly fee. But if you email me, we have a deal going on. So if you just email me, I can hook you up at no cost.
Webinar deal.
It is.
Wade, I will give you a major promo that your discussion boards are state of the art. That whenever I was looking for something as a home inspector or even still as an energy auditor, I do a search, and you're usually always in the top 10, if not the top 3, that somebody from your organization has given some phenomenal information. And I've always been able to go there and find it. And it's been a great resource.
Thank you.
So the slide that Jay has up here, this is actually out of the code. This is in 2009. I believe it's in 6. It's still in 12 and 15. That this is the actual checklist that is required for air sealing for new construction. And it's a good guideline in general. But one of the things, we didn't do any polls because sometimes we find them to be a pain. But we usually just ask a question. We try to get people to just kind of like chime in for us. So my question for you is a poll question, and you just put your answer in under the question response or ask a question. What other type of inspections do you do? Some people do code type of inspections, or some people do IAQ or environmental or something. So if you could enlighten us as some other inspections that you do to broaden some people do FHA, that would be a nice handy thing to have as we continue our discussion. One of the things that exists in the code, and I'll be honest, I did code inspections for like a week because there's something that either you do and you do well and you're in it and you own it, or you consider it to be a major challenge due to the logistics and the fact that the building official has its own set of rules and the builder says, I don't care what you say, kid, leave my premises. Those things are common responses. But one of the things that code officials are looking for is that if you're 2009, this checklist must be completed, and the code does not say who can do it. They do accept, many of them municipalities will accept a home inspector to do this. So your builder may say, oh, great, you can do this. I'll give you $100 to walk through the structure and sign off that you check these areas. It's very obvious looking for foam or caulk for the most part, or some type of gasket. So it is a simple way to maybe add an extra $100 or $200 to do these inspections for a builder. Next slide, Jay. Jay, next slide.
One moment. We're moving on there. I was answering a question from one of the folks out there, Renardin, and it's going to take me about a book and a half to answer it. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay. So I'm going to send you the link to these illustrations, and these actually were created by South Face Energy in Atlanta, Georgia, and they're used in numerous ways of doing air sealing. And the numbers coordinate to this same checklist that is considered a code issue. And a lot of these are just easy to find things once you really kind of understand some of the key points. Next slide. So here's a perfect example, and if I was a home inspector today, this would be a challenge because now knee walls should actually have an air barrier on the backside, and all insulation should be encapsulated on all 6 sides. So not only was this insulation you see on the left poorly installed and crammed into or falling out of its knee wall or missing in some sections there, but now it really should actually have a backing on it. So that would be kind of an upgrade or a recommendation. But here's what you should be seeing. If you just hit the next, you'll see what a good install should look like. Or when you're in an attic and you're looking at a home that was built with the 2012 code or 15, is when you're up in the attic, you should see the backing of the knee wall. So this is actually looking down from the inside, but when you're up in the attic, you would actually see the backings that they have here. So it should be some type of air barrier. So again, this checklist covers that. Next slide. And again, these are all just some common stuff that's on there. Issues that actually show connections between the eaves to the toilet. That again, if you wouldn't have been able to see all the way through, you wouldn't have been able to see that. So these are just common things that should be in the install, but in a finished house, you would never actually catch these kind of concepts. Next slide. Again, this is the 6-pack hole, which you find in the crawl space. Below below there. So again, all these illustrations, I'm going to send you the links right now if you want to download these individual resources. So the one is actually the illustrations, and the other one is actually a guide on how to fix them. So it's a really great thing for FYI or builder or homeowner to actually see. It is orientated towards kind of a weatherization professional, but it's a very easy read for everybody. So I'm going to send those out now. You should all have a link. You can access those. Next slide.
Joe, I wanted to skip and talk a little bit about the pressure gauge. We got about 15 minutes left, so I kind of wanted to get into some of the tools and equipment. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. You want me to take this one, or you want to keep rolling? You sound great.
I think so. Jay and I both do consulting for Retrotec. We also do universal training, but we did want to give you an overview about what is some of the equipment that's out there and why it could be advantageous for you. But if you, most people think about a blower door or a duct tester and they all have a gauge, but these are things you can do with just a gauge. If you just had a gauge, whether you had the DM32 or if you had the Energy Conservatory gauge or if you had the older Retrotec gauge, you can actually do a lot of stuff. So it can convert some of the stuff in the gauge. You can actually test an exhaust fan with a gauge and a cardboard box. You can determine a dominant duct leakage test by having a gauge and closing off the house again and turning on the air handler. It would tell you if the house goes negative or positive. You can actually do pressure diagnostics in a house just under its natural conditions by just putting a pressure probe underneath openings below the sink or in the attic or out of those things. So there's a lot of great things that can be done with just a gauge by itself.
Right, and the way you can do it, and with not just any gauge, so with the DM32, we think it's a smart gauge. One of the things about this DM32 is that it's got a touch screen, so it's very easy for you to use. You don't have to toggle through a whole bunch of menus. So for those of you who are not accustomed to using a manometer or a differential pressure gauge, it's really easy because it's just a touchscreen. So we call it a smart gauge because it's kind of like a smartphone in that it does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is Wi-Fi. So you can see right there that we actually have our DM32 is actually a Wi-Fi. It's a gauge that's Wi-Fi capable or built with built-in Wi-Fi. So what that means is you can have an app on your phone to connect the gauge to run a blower door, to run a duct tester. You can actually have an app on your computer to run a blower door, and if you have that app on your computer, of course, you can actually be connected to the internet, which means that you can be communicating your tests, those diagnostic tests, those that you're doing. In addition to, or as another business option for those homeowners or those during your inspection. So these are just a few of the apps. I mean, we have apps for phones. We have apps for the PC, and then again, like I said, one of the great things about that PC app is that if you're online, you can actually be using what's called the virtual gauge to contact your gauge. You're running it and seeing it. You can talk to the homeowner, say, hey, check this out. This is what we're testing. This is what we're seeing, or to the say real estate agent. And then if you need additional support, or if you have a home office where you're connecting with someone, say for instance, maybe you're doing an inspection for a company that's out of state, or somebody that just can't make it out there, you can actually be showing those inspection results to people anywhere with an internet connection. So that's the gauge, and a little bit about how easy it is to run a blower door. It's so easy that even I guess I'm going to say a high school junior can do that, can set it up, right, Joe?
Sure.
I mean, so what we're talking about here, this guy, he looks like Joe but thinner with hair, who recently I think ran over a mailbox, correct?
Yeah, sure. Let's keep on topic.
Point is, hey, even guys that can't really, if you can drive a car, you can definitely set up a blower door, because we see it. This is actually proof in the pudding right here. So if you can drive your car into the driveway without hitting the mailbox, then you're a step ahead of this guy, and he's setting it up perfectly. So it's very, very easy to set up a blower door. It's not the test is not difficult to do. It's not. Interpreting the results can be difficult, and that's something that you need training for, and you need the support, you need the knowledge of the house as a system, and I'm sure almost all of these certifications that are offered by InterNACHI and Retrotec are very helpful. But I'm going to move on to this next slide. But here's how a blower door works. Pretty simple, right? So what the blower door, the blower door is commonly thought of when you call. The term blower door usually refers to a system. That system is three parts. It is a frame and some sort of panel. It is a gauge, and it is a fan. The fan is connected to the gauge, and this is so that the gauge can run the fan if necessary, but you don't necessarily have to use the fan. It's also connected to the gauge so that it can get pressure readings. To the fan, so they can get pressure readings off the fan. So air flows across the sensor in the middle of that fan, and that gives pressure readings to one of the channels of the gauge. That gauge, or a manometer, measures the fan pressure and the difference between the indoor and outdoor. So that fan pressure, it calculates in the manometer, as we talked about. It's converted into cubic feet per minute. And that CFM in the calculation is used to compare homes to one another. So the point is, oftentimes people ask, I've heard this one before, many savvy home inspectors have mentioned to me, they said, well, why do you, if you're pressurizing a house to, or depressurizing in this instance, to negative 50 pascals, then you're not really looking at that house as it operates in reality. That's not a natural state for that house. So what is the purpose of putting a house into an unnatural state? What's the purpose of getting the sort of results from that, or how are those actually accurate? Well, the reason for it is because we can actually, now if every house that we test is depressurized to the same amount, then we can actually compare them. So we can say this house, these two houses that we're comparing are both a certain amount of measurement, whether it be air changes per hour or cubic feet per minute. Cubic feet per minute, by the way, is pretty much the amount of air that you can fit into one milk crate. So 5 milk crates, 10, 25, 50, hundreds. So basically, that if you think about that, the cubic feet per minute is the amount of air that actually fits into one cubic foot is about the milk crate. And then here's a bunch of cubic feet per minute, and there's a bunch of math too if you want to do it. Ben, can you do that math? Can you do some long division for me? Thank you. 125. Thank you, sir. So, Joe, what do you think? Should we talk a little bit about how's everybody about that? I know I kind of moved through that pretty quick, but since we don't really have a whole 5 or 6 days to talk about how that works, are there any specific questions about that?
There are a couple questions. I want to clarify something. So somebody says, well, what's a home inspector? Or what's a building inspector? So I just want to clarify quickly that a home inspector is somebody who is licensed or certified in many of the states to do a private inspection for typically a real estate transaction. It doesn't have to be excluding to that, because some people hire a home inspector to evaluate their home or other conditions. But in general, it's usually part of a real estate transaction. And when I started, it just kind of became very common to do that. And now it's very rare to not have a home inspector as part of a real estate transaction. So when we talk about home inspectors, that's the kind of professional we're talking about. If we're talking about building inspectors, those are actually people who work for a municipality that are actually doing the evaluations to determine if it's code compliance and provide certificate of occupancy. So that's kind of like the difference between building official, building inspector, or actually a home inspector or a private home inspector. That helps hopefully a few people understand who are out there. Go ahead, Jay.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to segue into a little bit about duct testing. Ben, in our conversation yesterday, you spoke a little bit about identifying efficiencies, right, in HVAC?
Right.
And that's a pretty large part, I guess, of what a home inspector does, or how does that fit in?
When you walk to a heating or cooling system, we'd like that inspector to at least understand, if not correctly identify, efficiencies. So is it low, medium, or high efficiency? And knowing that should guide the rest of the inspection of that system.
Great. So the alternative here is what an energy auditor will do is actually test that system. So from our perspective at Retrotec, we don't make flue gas analysis machines that will actually give you a definite idea of what is how exactly how efficient that's running, and sort of what's in the flue gas and stuff like that. But what we do focus on is testing the ductwork. So that ductwork is the same. It's the same sort of idea as testing the house. We're testing for leakage. We're using a digital gauge. This is what the guts of that gauge look like, combined with a fan, and that's equaling success. Then usually we're getting test results at a different measurement. And here's something that you're probably familiar with. So what we'll do a lot of the times is just come into the house, attach to the ductwork. If you have two systems, we attach to each system individually, and run a test on that ductwork to see how tight that is. Because regardless of how efficient that system is, if that air, that conditioned air that it's supposed to be delivering is not delivered, or if it's picking up bad air from bad places and then delivering that as well, we not only have an energy problem, but we've got an indoor air quality problem. And that's part of what the energy auditor will do to test the ductwork. So we're just about out of time. And I want to definitely open up. I think that we've kind of covered all the questions as they came. It's been a really great discussion. Ben, thanks so much for adding just an absolute wealth of information and insight. And Joe, thank you too. And also, thank you for putting up that replacing your mailbox. I know that was probably hard. But your son did a fine job of putting up that blower door. Is there anybody have any questions that we're not getting to? I know my good friend Renardin wants to know more about how we get city inspectors to do diagnostic tests, or to have I think the terminology was to have a clue. Any thoughts? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Yes, but I told Renardin that actually costs extra, because that if I had the answer to how can we get the building inspectors to do it? Joe, do you know how?
Yeah, I do. So I actually get involved with my code officials back then, and I would actually get to know them, especially the ones that want to learn more about the energy side. They were thrilled that somebody could come and explain to them, what a home energy score was, or how a duct tester might work, and those kind of things. So that's just a great way to do that. They usually have a meeting statewide once a month. I would try to figure out a way to get in there to do an educational part of that with those guys. I would do lunch and learns with them, or real estate folks who wanted to learn more about the energy side. A lot of people just want knowledge, and that knowledge turns into business is really the other side of that.
Yeah, you know what? That is exactly what, Ben, I think you were talking about something similar yesterday about connecting the dots and getting to know some of those people. So maybe can we close it up with you take us out on that idea, that connecting the dots and networking and who you should know?
Yeah. So I believe if you're a home energy auditor or a home performance contractor, you really should get to know your local home inspectors. Why? Well, because they're probably talking to your potential client at a really great critical time when they're trying to buy a home and they're going to spend money. And it'd be great if they spent money with regard to home energy, so that they can actually put some money back into their pockets and have a really nice, comfortable, healthy home. So find a local chapter. If you don't know where to look for home inspectors in your area, I can help you. And another program that we have is the National Home Energy Score Program. We just went from statewide to national partnership with the DOE. And now home inspectors are going to be doing home energy scores. So if you're a home performance contractor, a home energy auditor, or in that area, understand that our home inspectors will be really talking about home energy, and you should really get to know them. These two industries overlap a lot: home energy inspections, home energy performance, and home inspections.
One of the things that I tell builders, they're like, well, who cares if I really do a blower door test or a duct test, because chances are nobody will know. I mean, they actually say that, right? I say, well, the reality is that many of the home inspectors that are coming to evaluate your homes are beginning to buy this equipment, and they're either doing it as a service, or many people buying homes, whether it's existing or new, want this to be done by an independent professional. And that's when they get in trouble, that they can easily find out that the home was not well sealed and it did not pass. And everybody's got to come to the table to figure out why my new home is not performing as it should have. So a lot of other people, like HVAC contractors, are looking for somebody to help them with testing, and they would rather hire it sometimes than actually buy it and train their own people.
Great. Well, thanks again, Ben. Thanks, Joe. And thanks, everybody, for attending. As always, we really, really appreciate you being part of the Retrotec family. We really appreciate your time, and we're glad that you spent it with us.
Hey.
Pleasure. Goodbye, everybody.